we talked about, the mites reproduce under the cap, and the mites are inside with the developing brood, and they're feeding on your brood. They take all the registered products in North America, they give you the pros, the cons, how to use it, when you shouldn't use it. They have videos for every registered product. You don't want to open up right here close to your face because you will get a whiff of the formic acid. We've got 2 strips here. Yeah, it's strong, I can smell it.
Oh yeah.
According to our label, we don't recommend treating with any in-hive feeders. So you shouldn't be feeding and treating at the same time. Today, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my beekeeping, a little about the company I work for, NOD Apiary Products, and then we'll get into the main product that we sell, which is Formic Pro, and we'll talk about treating for mites. So, I'm Tom Nolan. I work for NOD Apiary Products. I'm their North American sales rep. I take care of Canada and the US. I've been keeping bees, I guess, for about 14 years. I run a little, it's really hard, in a weird way, I consider myself a hobbyist, sideliner. I've got about 100 colonies. It's a sideline business, but it's kind of more of a hobby that got out of control. I do that with my wife, Sonia. We operate a little side business called Hive Town Honey. And this is my wife there. We have some hives on top of the roof at University of Toronto. I always tell this story. If anyone's heard me talk before, you've heard it before, but my wife is Cuban and she likes to dance salsa, and every Saturday she goes to a dance practice, because she's an advanced dancer. And my first year of beekeeping, after I got my bees installed and I started adding some supers, I need an extra pair of hands. And I said to her, hey, can you come out Saturday? I need a hand lifting some boxes, everything. And she looked at me all serious like, and she said, okay, let's get something straight here, okay? This beekeeping is your thing. I dance on Saturdays, I'll help you Saturday, but this is your thing. So here we are 14 years later. She's grafting queens. I go away on a business trip. I got 10 colonies in the yard. I come back, there's 13. I said, what happened here? She said, I made a few splits. So she's been seduced by the dark side of the beekeeping force. We're urban. I live in Toronto. I live in the city, so we have 2 rooftop apiaries. The first one you saw was University of Toronto downtown campus, and this one here is the University of Toronto suburban campus, which is on the sort of Scarborough, on the edge of the city, close to the Toronto Zoo. And what you're seeing in that photo is I got bee escapes on. I'm getting ready to pull honey. That's why you see the red tape on the upper entrances. This is my home bee yard, which is just about 45 minutes from home. It's right by the Toronto Zoo. It's in an area that we call the Rouge Valley. It's definitely a rural area, even though it's considered part of Toronto. I run some six frame nucleus colonies, putting 3 6-frame nukes together and sharing the honey supers with the 3 different colonies and queens. I was experimenting, playing around. It works. Doesn't work as well in Ontario as it would in Alberta or Manitoba because of the big canola honey flows that we don't have. So something more suited for bigger honey flows, but it was fun and it works. What else? Yeah, and that's just another one of my yards, and that's just a picture of me doing my Formic Pro application. So I'm as a beekeeper, why I say I'm a hobbyist is I still do everything manually. Like, I'm extracting honey out of my extractor into 5-gallon pails. I don't have well, I do now. Up until last week, I didn't have a clarifier or any bottling tank, so I broke down and sold my honey for equipment this year, and I got myself a 55-gallon jacketed tank and a clarifier, and I got a pump being delivered this weekend. So I'm transitioning out of the manual bucket brigade into a little more efficient processing the honey. So that's kind of just a little bit about where I am as a beekeeper. So I guess technically I'm a sideliner. By Ontario standard, because I have more than 50 colonies, I'm registered as a commercial beekeeper, but I definitely don't think of myself as a commercial beekeeper because I don't make my living from bees. So that's it. That's about me. There's another yard. There's my wife posing for the Instagram, because life's all about the gram, right? Again, my home yard, if you notice, my home yard looks different than the previous picture. There's no 6-frame nukes. That yard is always in flux. I build nukes there, I tear them apart there. I sometimes overwinter the 6-frame nukes, and sometimes I break them down and overwinter them as singles, because I'm still undecided as to, I can honestly say, unlike, you know, a commercial operator who's got their system, you know, down, I'm still experimenting. I'm still playing around a little bit as to what I really like and how I like. But it's a good area to do bees, and I produce a fair bit of honey by Ontario standard.
What does the fence keep out?
Bears. We got bears, yeah. And, you know, this is a typical Ontario story. My very first year beekeeping, I was at a different area yard, and the landowner had been on that land for 50 years. Oh, we don't have bears here. And that first year I lost 10 colonies to bears. Yeah, so every time I hear someone in Southern Ontario say we don't have bears here, I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And I still put up an electric fence. They just haven't seen them yet. Yeah, if you're in Southern Ontario, we have bears. And even that, my home yard close to the Toronto Zoo, which is very close to the city, we have bears there. So yeah, all my yards, unless they're the rooftop apiaries, they get electric bear fences. Yeah, so a little bit about NOD. I work for NOD Apiary Products. We're a Canadian company, and I'm proud to work for a company that really is a truly Canadian company that was started by beekeepers for beekeepers. We're not a big ag company who decided to get into treatments. This was a startup by a couple of Ontario beekeepers, and we have evolved into being a global company. We sell our products in 27 countries right now around the world. Our original product was a product called Mite, then it became Mite 2, Mite Quick Strips, and each year we improved the products into what is now our main product, which is Formic Pro. Just before we get into that, why formic acid? The founders of NOD, when Varroa first came here, which is, wow, 30 years ago, more, it's been that long, wanted to create a product that would be something that they could use in the hive that would protect the wholesome image of honey and not contaminate the wax or the honey, and that's when they settled on formic acid as the active ingredient. At NOD, we didn't discover, you know, the founders didn't discover that formic acid killed mites. They knew that in Europe. They had been experimenting with formic acid killing mites. The challenge was, you know, we're trying to kill an insect on an insect, trying to kill the mite without killing the bee. So the challenge was the delivery mechanism, and our polysaccharide gel pad, which I'll get into, was sort of the answer. We actually have a safe way now of delivering a controlled dose to the colony without mixing liquid formic acid, which can be dangerous for, you know, for the operator, for human health. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. A little bit about our team. We sell our product, but we don't sell direct to beekeepers. We sell through beekeeping supply stores like Worker and Hive. So we don't sell direct to beekeepers. But one thing I really try to drive home anytime I'm talking to people or I'm doing these events is, but we do support beekeepers. You call our number, you're going to get somebody on the phone. If not that day, you'll get somebody call back within a few hours. Or if you call our 800 number or send us an email to our info, you will get a call back or an answer back, and we're here to support you. Anytime anyone has any product related questions, we always encourage you to reach out. Another thing I'm quite proud of is we were counting up the years, the accumulated years, and we have over 125 or 150 years of accumulated beekeeping amongst our staff. Like a good chunk of our staff are beekeepers, and some are even commercial beekeepers. So you're going to be talking to somebody who knows bees when you have a question about our product. So I take care of commercial sales. Dana, who's our inside sales coordinator, and also doing some outside sales now. I used to take care of Australia and New Zealand, and it was way too much on top of Canada and US. So Dana is now taking care of Australia and New Zealand, and I'm happy to have that. Although I enjoyed going there, beautiful country, loved the trips, but you know, it's nice to have some of that off my plate. And of course, we're quite thrilled to have Dr. Heather Brockhart-Bell, who's a research scientist, a Canadian who had been living down in the US and California for quite a few years. And she's joined us, and I lose track of time. I keep thinking it's been 2 years, but Heather's probably been with us closer to 4 years now. And she does a lot of our trials and our research and is involved in product development on some of the newer products we're trying to develop, other mite control products that we're working on. So that's our team. Another thing we're quite proud of is we really try to engage and get active in the community. I myself, I mentor the student group at the University of Toronto. Hannah, our beekeeper who runs our research yard, Hannah runs a program in conjunction with CFB Trenton, which is very similar to the Hives for Heroes program in the US, where we're encouraging active and retired military personnel to get involved in beekeeping. So we do a lot of that in the community around Ontario where we are. So that's a little bit about our company. So if we get into our products, in Canada we have 3 registered products. 2 mite control products, which is our Formic Pro, which, just curious, anybody, how many people in the room have used Formic Pro? Okay, so a good number of you have used it, good. We also sell 65% liquid formic acid that you make with the DIY pads. And we also make a Bee Cozy winter hive wrap, which I'll touch on briefly, but today we're going to focus on the mite control products. So I've got a short video here. Anybody here first year beekeeper treating for the first time? Okay, second year beekeepers, third year beekeepers. Okay, so it's a good video that goes over the life cycle of the Varroa mite, and it's short. It's about a 3-4 minute video. So we'll have a look at that, and it'll sort of lead us into the how to deal with these mites.
We'd like to introduce you to the Varroa mite. Well, to be precise, we'd like to introduce you to millions of Varroa mites. Why so many? Well, when it comes to the Varroa mite, there's no such thing as just one. And if you'd like to see how an infestation starts, you need to look no further than your own bees, especially drones, as they're pretty social and like to travel between hives. Since Varroa mites don't have any wings of their own, they slip into hives by hitching a ride on the backs of adult bees. And for the lucky mite, the trip includes an in-flight meal, as Varroa mites will begin feeding on honeybees' fat body tissue within a few minutes of clinging to the bee. Once they've entered the hive, Varroa mites slip undetected into the vulnerable, uncapped brood cells. This is where the mites lay in wait until the bees cap the brood. Once a cell is capped, the mother mite, like a tiny spider, climbs atop the cocoon of the developing bee, tears open a hole, and begins to feed on its fat body tissue. Within 3 days, the mother mite lays her first egg, which always develops into a male. Then, she lays 1 female egg every 30 hours over the next week or so in her newly acquired home under the brood cap. And as each of these female mites mature, they mate with their brother. By the time the baby bee develops and leaves its infested cell, as many as 3 fertilized mites will emerge with it, and the cycle continues. Using this strategy, the Varroa mite population can grow as fast as the bee population it feeds on. But when summer ends and the bee population declines, the hive is left with a huge mite population, and that's dangerous. Too many mites in a hive will overwhelm and kill entire bee colonies. So what does that mean for everyone's favorite insect, the honeybee? Well, honeybee colonies with heavy mite infestations can't effectively pollinate or produce honey because they suffer from diseases and viruses transmitted by the mites. In fact, honeybees suffer from as many as 20 different mite-induced viruses.
So our answer to the Varroa mite was basically our formic acid products. I said originally we started, our first product was a product called Mite Away. And what it was, can you hear me in the back? Yeah, 'cause I know I talk low. I gotta watch that. Our first product was a product called Mite Away. It was a thick kind of pad that we soaked in formic acid. It didn't fit in between the boxes or in the bee space, which meant we had to put a rim on it to make it fit under the rim. I talk sometimes to commercial beekeepers who, some who curse us for now they have thousands of rims that they no longer use, and some of us who pine for that old treatment because they got used to it and they loved it. But it had some challenges, and one of them was it was still hard to control the release. Sometimes the release would be a little too hard. The other challenge is, we're pouring liquid formic acid, which, if you splash, it can burn you. So it's not exactly a safe way to operate. So Mite Away evolved into Mite Away 2, where we're using a plastic bag with perforated holes to try and slow down the release, which worked a little better to slow down release, but we were still pouring liquid formic acid and making the pads yourself, which we were trying to get away from. But the big leap came when we moved from Mite Away 2 to Mite Away Quick Strips. We abandoned the soaking the pads and we developed a polysaccharide, which is a sugar gel pad, which is impregnated with formic acid, and it's wrapped in an eco-wick paper, and the paper is designed to act as a wick to make the product vapor off a little bit slower. We had great success with the Mite Away Quick Strips. We sold that in Canada and US and several European countries. But we had two challenges with the Mite Away Quick Strips. One, it had a 12-month shelf life. So that could be problematic for our dealers, if we make it, if we've got it for a few months and they buy it and they've got it on their shelf for a couple months, and then the end user, the beekeeper, buys it with plans to use it maybe in a couple months, and you get up against the expiry date. So that short 12-month shelf life was a bit of a challenge. But a bigger challenge was it was sensitive to storage temperature, not application temperature, but storage temperature. So for our customers in the southern states, in Texas and California and Louisiana, if they were storing this in, metal sheds and buildings that didn't have climate control, it would kind of break down a little fast. So it didn't store as well. But other than those two issues, the product worked very well. It was a good product. But we tweaked it by adding some binders and fillers to make it, one, more stable and extend the shelf life. So the Mite Away Quick Strips evolved into Formic Pro, which now has a 2-year shelf life and is much more stable. I mean, as long as you keep it out of direct sunlight, it doesn't need to be in an air-conditioned building. Room temperature is fine. If it does get exposed to higher temperatures, it's not a big deal. It just stores well. So we evolved here from the Mite Away 2, the Mite Away Quick Strips to Formic Pro. And we're still trying to make it better. So our product comes in 3 sizes. For hobbyists, you can buy 2 packs, you can buy 10 packs, or you can buy 30 packs for people who have more than 30 colonies, or even if you have 15 colonies, you can buy if you're doing it twice a year, spring and midsummer. We tried to make it available for all beekeepers, for hobbyists and for commercial beekeepers. For those of you who haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. It comes in a foil sachet like this. There's 2 pads inside. We consider the 2 pads as 1 dose, is 2 pads. It's a polysaccharide gel pad that's wrapped in our eco-wick paper, which is a composite paper that's fused together, designed as a wick. This paper, the foil sachet comes off. These are dummy pads. There's no active ingredients, so I don't have to worry about breathing this or burning my hands. These are just dummy pads. This is kind of what they look like. And they would have this paper. And I would not be touching these with my bare hands if they had the formic acid in it. Right now, these are just rubber dummy pads. But this paper is not a wrapper. This is an integral part of the product, so this paper stays on. Every now and again, someone will accidentally take the paper off. And the concern is if you do that, no one does it twice, by the way. If you do that, you're going to have a flash treatment. We're losing the slow release technology. It could be a little hard on your bees. You could have some bee mortality, and combined with extreme temperatures, you may have some colony mortality. So paper stays on. This is something I started adding to the presentations because we get this question a lot. We didn't have it in our literature before. When the product is new and it comes off our assembly line, our manufacturing line, it looks rather firm and very white. As it ages, the paper will start to get a little more translucent, and you'll see the product, and it'll look darker and it'll look moist. That's fine. It's not a problem. But we'll get these calls from somebody, let's say a hobbyist who only has 2 colonies. They buy a 2 dose and happens to be very fresh. Robert got it in this month. You walk in and you buy it and you put it on. It's like white, and that's what it looks like normal. You put on great. Then next year you come in to buy 2 more for your colonies, and Robert's had it on the shelf for 4 or 5 months, and it looks more like that. Wait, and people say, something's wrong, it's not the same. No, this is a normal aging process. Like it's good in the package up to 2 years. So not to worry if if you see a slight change in the way it looks, it's very, very, very normal. And the efficacy will not change. What makes our Formic Pro unique? One of the main selling features of our product is when we watched the video, we talked about, the mites reproduce under the cap. And while they're under the cap, the cap gets sealed and the mites are inside with the developing brood and they're feeding on your brood. Our product is the only product where the vapors penetrate the brood cap, where we're killing mites under the cap. That's one of the reasons why it's a short treatment period and you only have to do it once. You take a product like, and again, this is what we call a fumigant, it's a vapor. So you take a product like some of the synthetic products like Apivar, maybe you're familiar with Apivar, the plastic strip. Anybody ever used Apivar? Okay, so Apivar is a contact strip, which basically means you hang it in. The bees have to touch it. They touch that strip, the bees touch each other. They're spreading the active ingredient around, but they gotta come into contact with that strip. Ours is not a contact strip, it's a vapor. The bees fan, they move the vapors around. The reason why Apivar is a 42-day treatment is because it doesn't penetrate the brood cap. So it's not having any effect on those bees under the cap. They're waiting for the bees to emerge from the cap, and then it's killing the mites when they're on the adult bees, when they're in that dispersal phase, or what we used to call the phoretic phase. And that's why it's a longer treatment. So again, main feature is we're penetrating the brood cap. So when you're thinking of Formic Pro, think about it as a brood disease, because we're going to talk about the placement of the strips later and why we put them close to the brood area and how to place the strips. Second thing is it's an organic treatment. 30 years plus, we're not seeing any known cases of resistance to formic acid. And more importantly, it's not going to contaminate your wax or honey. So you can use this product while your honey supers are on, during the flow, while your supers are on. Your honey will be safe for human consumption and for your bees to eat. Any questions on that so far? We don't have to hold till the end.
My understanding is it's fairly recent that Health Canada came along and said it was okay to have the strips on during the honey phase. Is that right?
Oh, we have since the beginning. Even with our Mite Quickset formulation, which was, I lose track of time because Formic Pro is now about 7 years and Mite Quickset was on the market before. So yeah, for more than 10, 15 years, we've been legally allowed to use with supers on, yes. I saw another hand, sorry.
How often should we be treating with this product?
Yeah, okay. How often, the question was how often should we be treating with this product? Which really boils down to how often should we be treating, right? You have provincial guidelines as far as the recommended treatment threshold. My own personal philosophy and how I treat my bees is I like to start the season off with as low mite count as possible. Because like when we watch in a video, if you have mites and you have, let's say 1% mite, if you don't treat, they're only going in one direction, and that's up. So in the spring, you may have a very low mite count, but by midsummer, it's going way up there. So I pretty much treat always in the spring. I do my mite counts. If I'm at 1% in the spring, I'm treating because, again, they're only going up. So for me, spring is a critical treatment time. I usually do a midsummer treatment. And I usually do a fall cleanup. My midsummer treatment, I like to treat, the goal for me is start the season with a low mite count as possible. So that's my spring treatment. I want to knock my mites down before the queen starts laying what will be your winter bees. So in Alberta here, that may be at some point in August, right? And Robert and Jess could probably answer your exact time when that is. So, but before the queen starts laying with your winter bees, and then of course you're doing a follow-up in fall. Me, I treat with Formic Pro in the spring and midsummer, and I do a follow-up with oxalic acid sublimation in the fall. That's my regime. But to answer your question of when you should use Formic Pro, you could actually use Formic Pro anytime throughout the year, as long as you're within our temperature guidelines, which I'll get into, which is the maximum temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, but we'll get to that. So yeah, you can use it any time during the year as long as you're below the temperature guideline, which we'll get into.
It was my first time using this spring, and it looked very much like a pollen patty, but when we removed it, it was pretty much intact. So I was wondering if it worked.
Good question. Yeah, anyone who has history with our previous Mite Quick Strip pad, our Mite Quick Strip was also a polysaccharide sugar pad with the paper on it. A lot of the bees, when you use the Mite Quick Strips, they would actually start chewing at the remainder of the sugar pad and drag some of it out of the colony. By adding our organic binders and fillers to the Formic Pro, it's a little less attractive for the bees to eat. They tend to not want it. Some we'll see trying to chew the edge and take it out, but it's actually, they actually don't chew it and take it out. It dries up and shrinks, and usually you take your hive tool, you know, it may be propolized to the top of the bars, take your hive tool and remove it. It's very difficult for the bees to remove it. Sometimes they'll remove the paper, and you're left with just the pad. But no, they can't remove it all. So as far as efficacy, you know, most manufacturers, we do trials, and we have, you know, if we do 5 different trials and we get efficacies from high 80s to high 90s, we're going to go with the high 90 number. But when we drill down and look at really what's happening with this product, remember I told you it's the only product that penetrates the brood cap? So the mites that are on your adult bees, you know, what we call the dispersal phase or the phoretic phase, they're the easy ones to kill. I mean, they're on the adult bees, they're not below a cap. So we know when we treat with our full dose, we're getting about a 90% kill on the phoretic or bees in the dispersal phase. The ones that are below the cap, the immature mites, under the brood cap, we're getting about 80% to high 80s, depending, right? So when we talk about the immature mites, we're talking about that firstborn male and then the subsequent females. We're knocking off about 80% of those. So even if you, let's say you had a high mite count, let's say you had, I don't know, let's throw some numbers out there. Let's say you had a 3% infestation. You may not go down to, you may go back into an alkalosh, may not have a 0. You may find a mite or 2, right? But we have totally interrupted the reproductive cycle. We've not killed off the males. Some of the females that survived are damaged. What's missing? So we got the mites in the dispersal phase, we got the immature mites under the brood cap. What's missing? The mother mite, right? That mother mite who's under the cap, she's a little harder to kill because she's not a developing mature mite. She's got a, you know, a developed exoskeleton. She's harder to kill. So we may not kill all of the mother mites under the cap, but again, damaged and totally interrupted the reproductive cycle. And the reason why I like to go into this is most manufacturers, and we're all kind of guilty of that, is you'll see it on the packaging and stuff, 99% effective. And I always have a problem with that because if you tell me something is 99% effective, when I go post-treatment and do alcohol, I'm going to expect to see 0 mites. And that's not, in some cases you will, but in very high mite loads, like I worked with a commercial beekeeper 2 years ago whose mites got away from him. We were doing alcohol washes and finding 20 mites, 33 mites, 44 mites, right? We hit those colonies, all of them with 2 strips of Formic Pro. And when we went back, we dropped them drastically. But in some of them, we were still seeing 2 and 3 mites. Now, some people might say, that stuff didn't work, I still got 3 mites. If you had 33 mites, that percentage of infestation that's drastic. Getting that down to 3, you could follow up with another treatment. So this is why I like to break down what's really happening. You know,
you're talking per 100 bees here.
Per 100 bees, yeah, per 100 bee sample, yeah. Or no, excuse me, per 300 sample, right? Because half a cup is 300, right? Yeah, we're always,
How many mites per 300 bees?
yeah,
You were getting how many?
33. 33.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's-
Yeah, so if you take a,
2 to 3, I wanted to.
yes, no, but I'm saying if you took a 10% infestation and you knocked it down to 3 mites, which is now a 1%, I think you did a pretty good job. You could follow up with another treatment.
For 300 bees, you're okay, but if you had 100 bees, you're not okay.
Yeah, well, exactly, on the 2 mites, exactly, yes, yeah.
Question. So how does the formic acid kill the Varroa mite?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish we really knew. We've got theories. There's a lot of theories. I think one of the things why it is effective because it's attacking the mites in multiple ways, as opposed to sort of the synthetic miticides that are attacking just one, sort of like a neurotoxin. We think it's damaging the pads and maybe damaging the way they breathe. Yeah, but that's something we actually don't 100% know, but we do know it works. Yeah.
What's your reasoning for not using it for your fall treatment?
For my fall treatment, one, I like to rotate treatments. I think it's a good idea to rotate treatments. I use it twice. One of the challenges with the formic acid is it's a brood treatment, right? So we're trying to penetrate the brood cap, and it will damage some brood. So you lose some brood. In extreme cases, and it's usually associated with temperature. If you're using it when it's too hot, you could have some queen issues. Although we think that is really, I think that's really sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Overblown. I mean, I've been using it twice here for 10 years. Do I lose the odd queen? Yes. I lose the odd queen when I'm not treating. They supersede, they replace queens. There's queen issues always going on. But the thing is, in the fall, if it did trigger any queen problems, if you're beyond the date where you can get a new queen or your colony can't raise a new queen, that's why I like to use the oxalic acid. But more importantly, at that time of year when I'm using the oxalic acid, we don't have, when I'm doing it, we don't have cap brood. And if we do, we have very little cap brood. One of the great things about this product is it penetrates the brood. When you don't have cap brood, those mites that are on the adult bees, the photic mites, they're a little easier to kill. And in that case, the oxalic acid sublimation works quite well. I think it's a little gentler on the colony going into the fall, and that's my choice at that time of year. Yeah, and usually with me, when I'm doing that fall oxalic acid, when I've done a good job in the spring and midsummer with the formic acid, quite often, because my first few years using Mite Away Quick Strips, I never did a fall treatment. I did spring and midsummer. I only recently started doing the fall treatment, and I do it in really more of what I call a cleanup and almost like a check, right? Like when I do the oxalic acid sublimation, I watch the fall, and usually what I see is, some mites, not a lot, and I do it a second time and I get it down to 0. I usually, like take October. Let's say you're doing oxalic acid sublimation in October and you get a huge fall, and you do it again 3 days later, 5 days later, you get another huge fall. If you do that 3 times and then 3 times in the fall you get a huge fall, what that's telling me is you didn't do a good job in the spring and midsummer, because you should not have that kind of fall, that kind of mite count in the fall. The goal is to get it under control midsummer. And yeah, you're always gonna have some mites, but you can clean them up. So I'm doing it as almost as a monitoring method and a treatment method. That's why I like to have an inspection board underneath when I'm doing the fall treatment to see, because then if I know if I got a mite count that high in the fall, I need to go back and tweak what I'm doing or when I'm doing. I could be doing the Formic Pro too late. So yeah, we have 2 treatment options with the Formic Pro. We have what we call option 1, which is 2 strips for 14 days. And we have option 2, which is 1 strip for 10 days, followed by a second strip for another 10 days. So people will ask, why the 2 options? What's the difference? My preference is 2 strips for 14 days. Going back to what we talked about earlier, this is a brood treatment. the beauty of this product is it penetrates the brood cap, and our data tells us that's best done with 2 strips, right? It's really best. If you do the 1+1 method, the 1 strip for 10 days, under ideal conditions, you may get some penetration under the brood cap, but you're probably killing mostly the phoretic mites or the mites that are in the dispersal phase.
The 1+1, you're leaving the first one in when you put the second one in?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You could leave it in, you could take it out, as long as you take them both out after the 20 days. So people ask me, well, if that's the case, why even have the 1+1 method? Sometimes in the spring, depending on my colonies, I go in the spring, I'm checking my colonies, I do my all-call wash, I got a 1% infestation, but I don't have a lot of cat brood. Maybe there's a small amount of cat brood. The colony's not as big as I'd like to see it in the spring. You know, it's not a thriving colony in the spring. In a case like that, I may go with the 1+1 treatment, right? It's a little gentler on the smaller colony. In the spring, if I got a 1% treatment, I got a ton of cat brood. As the video told us, if you got a 1% in your sample, there's a lot of mites under that cap. So in a case like that, a lot of cat brood, I'm going with the 2 strips. In the fall, when the lady asked why I don't treat in the fall, I don't know if any of you were here a couple of weeks ago when Kathleen was doing her presentation, but Kathleen actually used to use, her method used to be, she would do 1 strip in the fall of the Formic Pro. Back then she didn't do the oxalic acid, but doing the 1 strip, because again, we've got no cat brood. You're doing this once all your brood has emerged, so it's easier to kill those phoretic mites.
I'm hearing you is one advantage of doing the 1 strip plus 1 strip is that it's a little easier on the...
It's a little gentler on the colony.
Gentler on the colony.
Yeah, yeah. Placement of the strips. Think of it as a brood treatment. So you're putting it, you want to have it, covering the center of the brood area. If you're using the 1 strip in the center of the hive, let's go to our next slide here. So some of the things to consider to have a positive outcome using the formic acid. Things to consider, very important, is temperature. Temperature guideline is between, my American kicked in. I spent too much time in the US. I was about to go into Fahrenheit. So you want to be between 10 and 30 degrees Celsius. Up here on the left, the single brood box. I run singles. I almost never put 2 strips on just a single. In Ontario where I live, we super pretty early. We come out of winter, we have a flow, we super right away. I always have at least 1 brood box, medium brood box on, or 2. Remember, it's not going to contaminate your honey. You can have it during the flow. And more importantly, the bees want to move away from the vapors, and they're going to want to expand the cluster and move up into the upper boxes. So I'm really not a big fan of doing 2 strips without having a super on. If you're running double brood boxes, strips go between your 2 brood boxes. 8-frame equipment. I know we got more and more people using 8-frame equipment. Anyone here using 8-frame boxes? Not today? Well, yeah?
9 frame.
Yeah, so 9 frames. So same thing, same configuration, everything would apply. The only thing that changes is sometimes we got people now who are using 8-frame equipment, but they're running them in all medium boxes. And typically they'll have 3 brood boxes. In a case like that, we say put the strips between the upper 2 because they'll just be too close to the lower entrance if they're on top of the bottom box. So temperature, hive strength. Hive strength is very important. This is not an ideal treatment for nucleus colonies. Going back to the difference between what we call the contact strips and ours, which is a vapor. You take a product like Apivar. It's a contact strip. The bees walk on it, they touch it, they move it around. Ours is a vapor. It's not pleasant. The bees don't like it. And what we found is you need a minimum of 4 to 5 frames of bees to fan and move those vapors around. They really play an active part in moving the vapors around. If you were to put it into a colony that only had 3 frames of bees, there's really not enough bees in there to fan and move the vapors around. So they could be overwhelmed by the vapors, and then you could have sort of a lot of bee mortality. So keep in mind temperature, hive strength, minimum 4 to 5 frames of bees, and that 4 to 5 frames really needs to be covered in a lot of bees. And I think 5 is closer, and that's in a 10 frame box. That's not in a nucleus box. It's really not designed to be in a nuke box. So temperature, hive strength, ventilation is key. No entrance reducers, no robbing screens. You want your entrance fully open. Some of the, we have it says options for permanently reduced entrances. That's typically commercial beekeepers who are palletized and they have reducers built into their pallet. Most of the guys who are running commercial operations like that, who have double brood boxes, what they'll do is when they lift up the box to put the strips on, they'll do the box set back or forward about a ½ inch, like you see in this photo here, to get ventilation, because they have the reduced entrance. So you really want fully, I'll get the question sometimes, oh, I need to have my entrance reducer on or a robbing screen on because I have high wasp pressure. There's a lot of yellow jackets or wasps. They're not going to be attracted to that hive when you put 2 formic acid strips in, particularly in the first 3 days. After that first 3 days, when most of the vaporing off has happened, you could go back to putting your reducer on. But in the first 3 days, you definitely don't want to have a reducer or a robbing screen on. So temperature, high strength, ventilation, that's the 3 keys to a successful outcome. Screen bottom board, solid bottom board. Most of our testing has all been done on solid bottom boards. If you're running screen bottom boards, we recommend you have the inspection tray in. The concern is if it's open, too much of the vapor is dumping out too fast and it'll lower the efficacy of the product. So if you got screen bottom boards, inspection tray should be in. Any questions on that stuff?
I just have a question. If I have my box 3 deep, should I be decreasing to 2 boxes before I treat, or how would you treat a 3 box?
Are you running deep boxes? 3 deep boxes, yeah. If I had 3 deep boxes, I would put the strips between the 2 boxes that had the most brood. Because think of this as a brood treatment. If you knew most of the brood was in the upper 2 boxes, I'd put it between the upper 2. If you thought it was in the lower 2, I'd put it between, but this time of year it's probably more in the upper 2. I'd put it between those, yeah.
10 degrees in Calgary here, we sometimes, a lot of the time, we go below 10.
Mm-hmm.
Both, absolutely in the spring and part of the summer.
Keep in mind on the lower temperature. Let's talk about the lower temperature. At NOD, we have, every year we get the same series of questions at the same time from the newer beekeepers. Like, for example, people are eager to get into their bees in the spring. We'll get a phone call, the first day, the first warm day we have, the bees are flying, and people call and say, hey, my bees are flying today. Can I put my Formic Pro on? And we say, no, slow it down. The bees just came out of winter. Winter is very stressful on the bees. What we want to make sure is the bees have been flying at least for a couple of weeks, a week or 2, consecutive flying weather, because you want your bees to recover from the stress of winter. You want to make sure that in our area in Ontario, we rarely have to feed in the spring because they'll start bringing in. But if your hives are nutritionally stressed, let's say there is no nectar coming in and your hives really needed to be fed, we'd recommend giving them some feed and get that sort of nutritional stress off before you put the pads on. So you want to just not put them on too early. And as far as the upper temperature, the other question we'll get is, I can't treat midsummer in August. I'm never going to get I'm never going to get 14 days below 30. Even though it's a 14-day treatment, or if you're doing the 1+1 method, it's a 10-day treatment. What you're looking for is a 3-day window, because most of that vaporing off happens in the first 3 days. So we say, look at the forecast. First day is your critical day. Day 2, day 3, if you're below 30, if day 4 it crept up above 30, that's not a problem. So you don't have to be looking for a 14-day window below 30. You're really looking for a 3-day window.
Sorry, the first 3 days then are would be the most critical?
That's most critical. And that's when there's most of the vapor off is happening, right? So even myself, in Southern Ontario, I treat in August every year. And usually I try to treat early August. First week is when I like to treat. And there was only one year, I forget what it was, about 3 or 4 years ago. It was scorching hot, and it was about the third week before I got a 3rd-day window where it dropped down below 30. Because what happens is a couple of things. In upper temperatures, it'll tend to want to vapor off faster, right? And also in upper temperatures, the bees are going to want to fan and push it out faster. So it seems counterintuitive, but when you get well above 30, you may actually have a lower efficacy because the bees are going to go into overdrive trying to get it out of the hive because it's so hot. Yeah, a lot of people think it's like you're going to have more damage above 30, but you could be pushing it out so fast that you're not getting any efficacy, or the bees are pushing it out so fast.
So is that the reason then that it's based on the outside temperature as opposed to, I always was puzzled by that, the temperature.
Yeah, because
because the temperature inside the hive is usually fairly consistent. If it's a little bit cool, well, the bees warm it up. If it's a little bit warm, the bees will cool it off.
Yeah, but
through ventilation, like you said.
Yeah.
But then this formic is based on outside temperature when
but the challenge
inside the hive is 36.
Yeah, but the challenge is, like when we get up into 35 degrees, 36 degrees, even though they can maintain that temperature inside, they are working really hard to do that. Those bees are in overdrive trying to maintain the temperature and humidity of the hive, and so now you're throwing another stressor on them, right? So that's why we say try to do it below 30, because when you get into these higher temperatures, your bees are working really hard to maintain the brood temperature that they need in there.
So it's basically because they'll evacuate all the formic vapor before it has a chance to
Exactly.
do its job.
Exactly.
What about rainy days since how we've had tons of that?
Yeah, usually what we say is you don't want it raining very hard on the first day, because even when it's raining lightly, the bees will still fly, right? But if it's really raining really heavy, you don't want to apply it. I know myself, for example, like when we talk about some of the common observations, my really strong colonies, my colonies are really strong when I do the 2-strip method. Some of them will want a beard, they'll want to come outside, right? And the reason for that is there's so many bees in there, they need to get some of them outside so the bees that are inside can cling to the frames and move those vapors around. Your weaker colonies or average sized colonies probably will not beard outside. And so if it's pouring rain outside and you put the strips in, it's going to be hard for them to want to come out if it's pouring rain. So that's why we say not to do it in the first day. Again, the first day is a critical day. If it started raining day 2, day 3, they'll survive. But you don't really want to have it raining on day 1. Yeah. So
Have you compared EPS boxes with the balloon boxes? They're a little bit more neutral on that outside temperature.
it works with EPS. It won't have any negative effect on EPS boxes. We have people using it. The only challenge we have with the EPS boxes, and it's not all of them, is some of them have different entrance designs. And so we tell people, just make sure you can do the fully open entrance. Like in the US, and we're starting to see them a little bit in Canada, but there's like an Apiary hive. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's got a built-in introducer that never is fully open. But all you got to do is take out the 3 screws to open it up. So it becomes a ventilation issue. But no, they work fine in EPS hives. Yeah, because we sell a fair bit of it in Australia and New Zealand, where these hives are actually more common.
According to that, I understand the best time to put that early morning, right?
Yeah.
It does very well.
Well, I do it in the daytime. I mean, I do it in the evening. Yeah, not in the evening. Yeah, not in the evening. Yeah, like sometimes people will say to me about the common observations is like, how's this going to work if my bees are bearding? How's it going to kill mites if my bees are bearding? Keep in mind, it's a brood treatment. We're really targeting those mites that are below the cap, and those bees that are outside, they're going to come back in. at night, and they're going to come back in the following day, and the product is still vaporing off for 14 days. So eventually, and again, those mites that are on the adult bees, they're the easier ones to kill. So I wouldn't be too concerned. Some people think, well, it's not going to work if they're outside bearding, but yes, it will.
So what time of day is best to put them in?
When I can sneak away from work, lunch hour. No, I know really. I got my own personal quirks. I mean, I still have a bit of what I call the hobbyist mentality. I like to do I don't like to do inspections first thing in the morning. I figure all the foragers are home. Why not do it when they're out, when they're away? But you can. I mean, commercial guys got to do it. They got to do it when they do it, right? So you can put it on first thing in the morning. I typically like to do it, once the bees are flying, once not all the foragers are home. Have I done it in the evening? Yeah, there's been I wouldn't say evening, but there's been times when I've had to go in after work and put them in at 6 o'clock or 7 in the evening, midsummer, not a problem, but typically any time during the day. I just don't do it at night when it's dark. Yeah, I don't typically do any beekeeping at night. So some of the common observations, bearding, you might see a little bit of bearding on your strong colonies. It is a brood treatment, so you may see some dead bees on the landing board and some dead brood on the landing board. For those of us who used it, for years, we get used to that. It's a normal occurrence. We joke about this sometimes. Every now and again, someone who's used it for the first time, they'll get a couple hundred dead bees on their landing board, and they call us, and our phone rings off the hook, and they say, you've killed all my bees. And I said, well, sweep them up and show me how many you got in a photo, right? And quite often, it could be a couple hundred dead bees, no more than we do in an alcohol wash. One of the things I always find peculiar around that is that in most beekeeping 101 classes and stuff, you'll often hear all the time that a queen can lay, 1,500, up to 1,500, maybe 2,000 eggs a day. We hear this all the time. But something you don't hear mentioned often in the 101 classes is that we're probably losing about 1,000 bees a day just through flying and not coming back, predators getting eaten by bees, older bees dying off, sick bees not wanting to die in the hive. So 300 bees in the realm of the life cycle of the colony is minuscule. So you will not uncommon to see that. Where I really see it and get a really clear picture of it is on my rooftop apiaries, right? And here's what I typically see. I'll show up to put on my Formic Pro pads, and it's a normal day. They're zip, zip, they're coming in, they're coming out. They're bringing in pollen, they're in, they're out. You put the pads on, that stops. You go back on day 2, the following morning, that's when you'll probably see some dead bees on the landing board, and you're not going to see a lot of foraging. They're not foraging. They're in there, they're fanning, they're moving the vapors around, they're trying to deal with the vapors. Day 3, if I go back and look, they've cleaned up the dead bees on the landing board, and by day 3, they're back to foraging. Pretty normal. I see it all the time. Okay, another common observation. It's not unusual when you're using the full dose of the Formic Pro for your queen to stop laying. Again, this is something where we get more calls from the small-scale hobby beekeepers than the commercial ones, and the only reason for that is because most small-scale hobbyists have their hives in their backyard, and so they're in there every day looking, right? We'll have people who will use the 2 strips of Formic Pro for 14 days. They go in on day 14, and they don't see any eggs or young larvae, because it's a brood treatment and it can kill some eggs and larvae. Not always. Sometimes you'll still see eggs and larvae, but sometimes you won't see eggs. You'll see the older larvae, but you won't see the eggs and young larvae. And sometimes they can't find their queen. So I'll get 2 questions. Killed my queen, and I always tell them, give it a week. Just do not go out and buy a queen, just give it a week, right? I don't see any eggs and larvae, you must have killed my queen. No, it's not uncommon for the queen to stop laying, right? Okay, and I'll check back, or they'll call me, a week later, yeah, I see eggs, so the queen's not. Or I get the opposite. No way, you killed my queen, I'm going out to buy a queen. And they go out and buy a queen, they put the queen in, and then I get a call a day or 2 later, hey, my brand new queen I just bought is dead on the landing board. I said, yeah, it's because your old one's still in there, right? And she kicks back in. And I've seen this over and over. And I see it more often when I'm checking my smaller colonies. I'll go frame by frame and I don't see eggs, and I'll see the queen and I just leave it, and I go back, 4 days later, 5 days later, and I start seeing queens. So the queen will stop laying. This is a common observation. It doesn't always happen, but it happens fairly common. So again, don't rush out and buy a queen. Give it a week. Or buy a queen and find out. But I joke about it because I've been there, I've done it. All these things I've done, right? I've thought for sure I was queenless, and they're back a couple days later. So we were outside earlier doing alcohol washes, demonstrating. Jess was demonstrating to people who are not too familiar with how to do an alcohol wash. And one of the things I always recommend with our product and with all products, like, I'm a big advocate of knowing your mite numbers. I think you should be, doing an alcohol wash in the spring. I think you should be doing it midsummer and in the fall at the bare minimum. If you're not doing 3 washes a season, that's the bare minimum. Sometimes when I got time, I'm doing it monthly. And more importantly, is that by doing the alcohol washes, or another effect, if you're doing sticky boards or any method that you're doing regularly and consistently where you're watching the trends, is that's when you know if you're at threshold or not and whether you should treat. And more importantly, after you treat, you should be doing a follow-up alcohol wash to find out, did the treatment work? Because like in a case where, with a really high mite load, you may do a good job really knocking the mites down, but you may have to actually do a follow-up treatment. But if you're not doing those monitoring, how do you know? And some people will say, well, I'm just going to prophylactically treat anyways. Okay, fine. But what if the treatment didn't work? What if it's, for whatever reason, the treatment didn't work? Whether there was an issue with the treatment, or you didn't apply it properly, or it wasn't the right time of year for that treatment. So I really am big on knowing your numbers pre and post treatment. That's me. I'll get off the soapbox, but I think that's really, we go through winter losses every year. We look at data every year across North America, and I think the science is pretty clear. Our biggest challenge is the Varroa mite. There are a lot of other challenges, but you can reduce some of the other problems by having your mites under control, because that's something we can control. So that's why I really believe we really got to sort of get comfortable doing some type of monitoring, whether it's using sticky boards or alcohol washes.
Is Ontario a lot worse than the western provinces, say Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba?
For winter loss?
For the mites? Are we about even?
No, I think the mite pressure is the same. We have hobby beekeepers in Ontario who are never going to have a lot of colonies. Some of these people have 2, 3, 4, 5 colonies, but been keeping bees for 10, 15 years, and they're darn good beekeepers. They're not having huge losses. And we got commercial guys in Ontario who also are having pretty decent overwintering. But we have some commercial guys who are having horrible overwintering, and we got some hobbyists who are having horrible overwintering. It's not like, oh, commercial good, hobby bad.
So
no.
To do with winter, how severe the winter is, and the mites, and many other things.
Yeah. But again, it's sort of the wintering stuff is. Like I'm a big believer. We were talking about this earlier. There's a researcher in Michigan, Dr. Megan Milbrath. She teaches at the University of Michigan, and she ran the tech transfer program. She's also commercial beekeeper, runs a couple hundred colonies of her own. And she always says, we get hung up on how to wrap our hives and what should be wrapping. She always says about winter losses, if you have an adequate size colony and an adequate size hive that is well fed, properly treated, and disease-free, they can survive the Manitoba winter, the Alberta winter, and the Ontario winter. If you don't tick those boxes, the best wrap in the world isn't going to save you. That's got to be the foundation of, and then you can tweak your overwintering on different wraps and sort of insulating materials you use. And I've experienced that, because I can tell you, I wrap my colonies, and my mentor one year was going into his spring yard to unwrap his colonies. His guys actually missed a yard. They never wrapped them. And his winter losses in that yard were no different than the other yards, because they went in strong healthy, well-fed, well-treated. You know?
Also depends where they're sitting, whether they're sheltered or not.
Yeah. I'm saying there is a place for wrapping, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is sometimes people want to focus on the winter more than the condition of the bees that went into that winter. I think a good healthy hive can survive some pretty harsh conditions, as we already know from Western Canada.
Is it true about 25 to 30% of the hives fail in commercial operations, say 10 years ago? And now it's about 40 or 45%. Is it that high?
It does get high some years, yeah.
Say it's going way up, like 10% more.
It depends what numbers you're looking at, right? Because I spend, I mean, numbers, there are high losses, but you know, they're the ones that get the publicity, they're the ones that get the news, they're the ones that get, you know, I know commercial operators in the US who are still having pretty decent overwintering success. And, you know, you don't want to, you don't want to point the finger at the beekeeper, but I think there's a lot of things that we can control that don't get the attention they should get. I get to a certain point of the year in August going into September, and if you know, that colony either gets written off or it gets merged with a stronger colony if it's disease free. Because I like to take my losses in the fall, not spend money for extra feed and overwintering and wrapping for a colony that really wasn't strong enough to be going into the winter. And I think in experience, we learned that with experience, what is a colony that's strong enough to overwinter in our particular area. But you know, most of us, I think, learn that the hard way. We try to overwinter colonies that really are too weak to be overwintered. Having said that, you could also overwinter pretty small colonies if they're well-fed, disease-free, in adequate size box. Because nukes, some people are overwintering nukes done properly. It's got to be done properly.
I know a strong hive normally takes care of the beetles and the moths, but does this treatment have any impact on a hive beetle or wax moth?
Unfortunately, no. No, funny, we had a fellow from the US call us who swears, no, your product kills small hive beetle. And we're like, no, it doesn't. Yeah, I know it does. I said, trust me, if we knew that, we'd be advertising that. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, has no effect on it. And again, for us in Southern Ontario, small hive beetle, I've never seen it in any of my colonies. It's around my area. It seems to be a very manageable problem in our area. Much bigger problem in the southern U.S. with the warm weather. Our winter seems to take care of it. You run into a problem with weaker colonies. The small hive beetle is kind of what do you call it? An opportunistic pest. Your big strong colonies will deal with it. It's your small weak colonies, which is another reason why you really got to sort of pay attention to your weaker colonies, because they will not be able to fend off a small hive beetle infestation. I used to have this question that came up from some of our commercial beekeepers. That's a photo that was taken by Randy Oliver. This was post. I think in this particular one he was using the Mite quick strips, which would be the same as Formic Pro. Post treatment, his guy pulled that frame and shook it, and the nectar fell out. And the point he was trying to make with that is we talked about how I always treat in the spring, and I think it's important to treat in the spring. I've run into some commercial beekeepers who claim they don't want to treat in the spring with formic acid because, remember, we said it's a brood treatment and it could affect your brood and kill some brood. So the thinking was it will set my brood back, so I don't want to treat with it in the spring. So they wait until, after the flow when they're pulling honey. Well, like we said in the video, if your mites are only going in one direction, and that's up. I think there's plenty of data out there that tells us if you have a colony with a high mite load and you have a colony that has 0 mites, that colony that has a very high mite load will never produce as much honey as a colony that has a low mite load. When your bees are trying to deal with high mites and dealing with the issues and the viruses that come with mites, they're not producing honey. So I've never bought into it's going to set my brood back, because they bounce back super fast. That queen kicks back in within a few days, she's laying and she comes back up. Another thing that Randy mentioned, and the point he's trying to make in this, is I've seen this in my own colonies. I'll have like spotty brood patterns, a high mite load, because as you get a higher mite load, you start to get that sort of parasitic mite syndrome. Knock it back with 2 strips of Formic Pro, and a few weeks later, post-treatment, you start to see really uniform, nice brood patterns. It really does sort of clean up some of those issues. So that's why I've, even though yes, it kills some brood, it might set your brood back, not enough to say I'm not doing it, because I think the alternative, a high mite load, has a much more negative impact than what's going to happen with the treatment.
With the spring treatment, if you're looking to make splits or nukes, do you treat before or after you're doing the splits?
That's where it gets tricky. And I run into that same issue with myself. This year I was in a growing year. I made a lot of splits, and I thought, do I treat before or after I do my splits? I chose to do the treatment before my splits, because my splits and my nukes I were making were for myself, and I had that time to bounce back. For a commercial operator who's selling nukes, and you're up on, you're trying to get an early timeline with your nukes, you could split and then sort of either treat with another option, but I tend to treat and then split, yeah. But again, tying into that, if you have a good regime, if you're treating in the spring, you're treating midsummer, and you're cleaning up in the fall, you're probably not going to have a big issue in the spring, like once you have a good regimented program. And that's why for me, I was fine treating and splitting. But yeah, that can be a challenging question for someone trying to sell nukes. But again, can you sell nukes if you have a high mite load? You're not going to get a permit. So for me, yeah, it's that's why, keep sounding like I'm repeating myself, but that's why it's important to keep them low from the beginning, knock them down before the queen starts laying what will be your winter bees, and do a cleanup before the winter. Because, if you don't do those things, you're never getting a nuke permit anyways, because when they come out to inspect your bees, you're going to have a high mite count. Yeah. I got my nuke permit. What else? For those of you who are inclined and like to read research, we got a lot of research papers, internal and external, third party, on our website. Any other questions post that?
Want to back that slide up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. This year, I always like to do a plug for this one, the Honeybee Health Coalition. The Honeybee Health Coalition, for those of you who haven't heard about that, the Honeybee Health Coalition is an association, and they have something called the Varroa Guide. And if you go on their website and you punch in the Varroa Guide, what I love about their Varroa Guide is they don't have any dog in the race. They take all the registered products in North America, they give you the pros, the cons, how to use it, when you shouldn't use it, and it's non-biased. And more importantly, they have videos for every registered product. They got videos how to do a Formic Pro video, how to do oxalic acid, how to do Apivar, and it's just a really good resource. It's a really good resource, and it's constantly updated. So their YouTube channel is really worth looking at. I mean, we also have application videos on our NOD global website, but if you want a third party that's, not biased, that's a great resource. I think any beekeeper who's learning how to deal with Varroa and learn about Varroa treatments, I don't think there's a better resource than the Honeybee Health Coalition out there.
When you're buying the strips, are you wearing like rubber gloves?
Yes.
Are you going to talk about that when we're outside?
Yeah, but we'll touch on it now. One of the things I said earlier is that our earlier products were not as safe. Pouring liquid formic acid is not safe. If you're dealing with liquid formic acid, you should have long sleeves, long pants, rubber nitrile gloves, and probably a full respirator with a face shield, because if you get a splash of formic acid on your face, it's very dangerous. Our formulated product, the Formic Pro, Very safe, easy to use out of the package. Respirator not required. You're not going to splash. We still think you should have long sleeve, but definitely as far as PPE goes, nitrile gloves or rubber gloves. The thin disposable gloves are fine, because if you don't, it will burn the skin off your fingers. And even when you're taking the spent strips out of the hive, you should still put on nitrile gloves. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question. Good question.
I had a couple of questions that you were showing your 6-frame nuke
Yeah.
with a full strip on it.
Yeah.
Now, is there any problem with cutting the strip in two lengthways and kind of spreading it, to a different place, two different places in the hive?
Yeah.
5-frame nuke, you got to put it lengthways there.
Yeah. As a manufacturer, we're obliged to follow the legalities of EPA, and you've probably heard the term, the label is the law. So for us to get our product registered, right, we have to supply data on how it's applied, the dosage and everything. And of course we do that with standard equipment, standard 10-frame Langstroth equipment. That's how most manufacturers do it, because that's the norm. We learned through that we need a minimum of 5 frames of bees. Going back to the nuke question, that would be an off-label use.
A little bit.
Off-label. Having said that, I know of several commercial operators who run nukes, who try different things, one strip, cutting strips in half. Is that done? Yes. Is that something we can advocate? No. The only thing I tell people is that if you're going to experiment like that, if you're doing nukes and you think, hey, I want to try and treat my nukes, if you got a nuke yard with 20, 30 nukes, you don't want to do that to all of them. You might want to try it on 1 or 2 and find out what the dose is. Yeah. Like I figured out what works for me on my double 6-frame nukes. I put a strip in my double 6-frame nukes, but that would be considered an off-label use. So I know that works in my configuration, but you're in the experimental zone doing that. That's why it's hard for me to give you exact, because we don't have the data on it. One nice thing is our researcher, Dr. Heather Brocard-Bill, she's doing some experiments to figure out if we can come up with a sort of a dosage for nukes. But it's doing these trials are really time consuming, and we've got a lot of other stuff in front of that, some of the R&D stuff we're doing, which is taking priority. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, another question I had as well is when you put those strips in, like what you're showing really is nice and clean, but in effect in a hive, when you pull that box off and try and slip that thing in, there's a bunch of honey and there's all sorts of stuff between the hives.
Oh, good question.
Is that a big deal? Some of them it's kind of hard to even pry the boxes apart.
Well, I'll tell you.
Like I really have never scraped them.
Yeah.
And I've used it for how many years? Probably half a dozen years.
Our bee inspector who came to my yard said to me, man, I really love your yard. One, both your yards I inspected, the grass was cut, right? And that's my wife, because she has this really issue about ticks. So I keep the grass cut and my yard's perfect. So I can't take credit for that. And 2, he said, your frames were so clean. Yeah, and maybe that's just a perk of, a quirk of me as a beekeeper. But yeah, I like my frames clean. When I crack those boxes, if those frames are covered in a burr comb between the boxes or honey, I scrape all that off. I always have my little tub with me, it goes in the tub. And when I put the strips on, the strips are going between clean boxes. Yeah, I scrape it all off. I know it's work, it's extra work, but I do it.
So you would do that before you apply the strip?
Yeah, always.
That's a fair amount of work.
Yeah, and I got 100 colonies.
It's kind of logical.
Yeah.
But there's always this urgency,
I know it's not that much work. Well, the other thing too is also I do that regularly on inspections. So if I'm in my hives every 2 weeks, I tend to do that anyways. So I don't get a huge buildup. I don't get I'm a little sort of finicky about that.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
mean, what I do is I just gotta make sure if I pull the honey off and make sure that there's some eggs in there.
Yeah, well,
There's eggs, amen.
Well, the other thing too is, and maybe, you know, we all have our different ways of doing things, but, you know, when I'm doing inspections, for example, and I'm pulling honey supers off to go into the brood box, if I got a lot of burr comb and stuff, and I don't want to be crushing bees anyways, right? So I'm trying to always minimize how many bees I'm crushing.
Yeah.
So I tend to clean my top bars often.
Yeah.
That's why the bee inspector loves going into my hives. Because he says, yeah, I go into some commercial guys, I can't even get the frames out there, so wrenched it.
Do you clean the bottom as well, or no? Because a lot of times your drones are down there.
If I'm between the strips?
Yeah, like, so between, you say you clean the top bars, but do you do the, like, the bottom, so the bottom of the top box as well?
The bottom bars.
Yeah, thank you.
If it's really building up a lot, yeah, I do sometimes, yeah.
Question. For your mid-season treatment, if you were to choose, would you put it in because of the 3 days and you don't want to waste good days for flying? Would you choose like cloudy days or rainy days to put your strips in? Like if you know that you're going to have a rainy week, is that a good time to put it in?
That's a first. No one's ever asked me that question before.
Because you waste days when they don't fly, right? Like, we don't have
Yeah,
that many good
they
days.
stop flying for 2 days.
Yeah.
But again, I weigh it against, is 2 days not flying, you know, more detrimental than a high mite load? You know?
But if you could
Yeah.
choose.
No.
just have one hive,
Yeah,
so-
well, you got one hive, so you could, you have that luxury, right? For me, it's I do it on my day off.
Yeah.
I do it when I got the weather window. Yeah. But I don't think it would make a huge, in life, in the seasonality of the bees, 2 days, nah.
I have one more question. In actual fact, last year I kind of chickened out on the Formic Pro because of all the blinking, I guess, wasps and everything else that were going on. So I only put one strip in. I just left one strip in, and then I went back to oxalic acid because I kind of thought then there was robbing as well going on in the middle of August. And, that's kind of, but anyway, I've ended up with a bunch of strips, probably half a box of strips that are expired in July. You probably can't answer that, July this year.
July this year?
And, I'm not sure what to say, but anyway.
You
throw them all out?
You can get another 6 months out of those.
Okay, that's the question I had. There were some rumors that they were extended for some time.
Yeah, no, you
So
can,
the efficacy would be close to what it's, and they weren't in the sun or anything else. They were in a cool place.
Yeah. At some point they're going to expire, but I have no problem saying a month or two past, they're going to be fine.
Yeah. Okay, not that they're really that expensive. I think it's cheaper than the Apiary anyway, or it used to be.
They're pretty close. So we talked about treating single brood boxes or double brood boxes. Just give them a little bit of smoke, just to let them know we're here. And we'll take some boxes off.
Robert hasn't been scraping.
Robert hasn't been scraping, we gotta let him go. That's our honey super. We got 2 brood boxes. And we're gonna put our strips in between the boxes. I don't have to worry about the queen because there's no excluder on here. So, we've got our PPE, which is our nitrile gloves. Our sleeves are covered. We don't have to really worry about any splashing. It's a pretty safe product to work with. But one of the things is when you open up the package, you don't want to open up right here close to your face because you will get a whiff of the formic acid. So just open it a little lower. And we'll just put our package here for now. We've got 2 strips here. Yeah, it's strong. I can smell it.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll separate our strips. Just smoke our bees off the frames a little bit. And we want to cover the whole brood area in the center. So we're going from the outside frame here. And we're going to go from the outside frame here. And keep them in the center, because this is our brood area. And it's really that simple. The strips are thin enough that they fit in between the bee space. So we'll put our colony back together.
Do you give it some more air, like move it over a bit?
No, we don't need to do that because we have a fully open entrance.
Okay.
So you were thinking setting it back like we saw on the chart?
Yeah.
That's usually for the commercial beekeepers who have permanent reduced entrances with only an entrance maybe this small, which wouldn't give them enough ventilation. But what we got here is a fully open hive with a pretty big super on it, so they'll be fine.
I added just an empty box on mine.
That works too. But if you're going to add an extra box, if you got a single, you really,
I just left it wide open
is this on a single or a double?
on a double.
Oh, okay.
I just took the honey off, put it hollow on top,
Right.
and that's how I left it for the 14 days.
Yeah, the only thing with that is usually we tell people you're probably better with frames in it, because the bees will want to cling to something so they can fan. And it's all they have there are the edges of the box, right? By having either drawn, even undrawn foundation, they would be able to cling to those and fan. But it'll work. The fact that you got a double is fine.
Are these Langstroth boxes?
They are.
This is exactly 10 months.
So does the internal volume, does it have much effect on the process? So in the spring you might have 2 boxes only with 0 supers, and here now, late summer, you've got a deep and a medium super on top, so you've got a little bit more air volume. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, how that ventilation factors in?
Yeah, what you really want to avoid is not having enough room for the bees to move up. So like I said, I run single brood boxes, so I always add 1 or 2 medium boxes, which is basically like a double. But I wouldn't want to put 2 strips on just a single without anything on top. They want that room to be able to expand the cluster.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
That has nothing to do with this.
Sure.
Would you recommend for like a newer hive, one that's relatively good, five in there, to leave them down as a single for the winter, or to expand them up to the second one with the honey and make it a double for the winter and then start going for the double?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that management choice of running singles or doubles, that's usually something we have to decide early in the year, right? Because if you're going to run singles, it's got to be a big, strong single. And if you're going to run doubles, there's got to be enough bees. So usually, like, what's your colony like now?
Well, I just never knew, like, so many people split their hives, and I'm like, okay, you take off the second box that's just full of honey right now, and you look at it, and it is absolutely nothing but bees on all 10 frames.
Yeah, but keep in mind too that what we're seeing mostly here are summer bees, and you're going to lose a lot of that field force, and so by the time winter comes around, that cluster is going to really contract. Yeah.
Well, it's just, I just don't want them, because I found in the past, if you have a good single, and then you have your honey in the second one, and you wrap it for the winter, I find in Alberta, having that 27, 28, 2 days drop down to well below freezing again, the amount of moisture they're not able to beard out because it's too cold to beard out, and the moisture is killing them because then they're going back in and freezing.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that.
So I'm just like, do I stay with that new hive as a single for the winter, or do I actually take out the queen extruder and let it double up and give them full amount of resources for the winter?
I'm not really sure about how fast your bees grow this time of year, but I would think by this time that decision, I'd be inclined to say leave it as a single.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a single. Again, we're going to open it away from our face, not up here. Keep it down a bit. Put that there. strips ready. So basically we're going to lift up the queen excluder. Take a quick peek, make sure she's not on there. Because that's usually what happens when you don't look. And we'll smoke them down a bit. And again, we're going to do the same thing. We want to cover the center of the brood nest. So we're going to go outside and outside. Now we have a feeder in here, but it's empty. According to our label, we don't recommend treating with any in-hive feeders. So you shouldn't be feeding and treating at the same time. So it's that simple. We put our queen excluder back. So myself, even though I treat with supers on, I tend to build my summer treatment into after I pull my first round of honey. So I'm never lifting 3 and 4 boxes of honey. I typically have 1, maybe 2 on when I'm putting my strips on. I mean, this is fine, but it's just a little more work than I want to do. Yeah, it's definitely not about right or wrong, because we were talking about this earlier. I know commercial beekeepers in the US who run thousands of colonies without queen excluders, and I know guys who run thousands of colonies with queen excluders. It becomes a management choice how you choose to manage.
Tom, why did you not put, you said to not put the Formic Pro with when you're feeding? What was the logic behind that?
Yeah, we don't know the exact science behind it, but we ran some internal trials at NOD, and what happened was we compared some colonies that had open source feeding, like barrel feeding, and we treated some that had internal feeders, and we had a much higher overwinter colony mortality in the colonies that had feeders.
Okay.
So we don't really know why. So for that reason, we advise, not feeding at the same time.
Okay.
Which is not really an issue for me, because in the spring we don't need to feed right away.
Yeah,
and we're treating during the flow. So for us, especially in Alberta, Ontario, not a problem. It becomes a bit of a challenge for some of the southern states where they have very long sort of dearth periods.
Yeah.
So they got to make sure they consciously feed first, get the bees sort of not nutritionally stressed, and then treat.
Does that apply to external bucket feeders or top feeders as well?
Yeah, we still consider those kind of internal feeding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no feeding during.
Yeah. For anybody who's never done a Formic Pro application, that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's sometimes I think we get.
You sold me. We're gonna get some for our little hobby operation.
Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you.